On behalf of the Baha'i Chair for Studies in Development, I would like to invite all the participants to this webinar on building a more caring world, implications for the family, and of course, our very distinguished panelists who today will share their insights and thoughts on this very important theme. Before we start, I wanted to share a few thoughts on where we are coming from in terms of the Baha'i Chair, in terms of organizing this series of webinars. This is the first webinar in a series being organized by the Baha'i Chair for Studies in Development at Devi Ahilya University in Indore, on the theme of building a more caring world, implications for the family, the community, and the market. Like all other social beings, human beings cannot survive without receiving care, at least in the initial stages of life. We constantly depend on the help, nurturance, companionship, and support of others in our environment. Despite its crucial role in sustaining life and developing human capabilities, the true value of care often remains unrecognized. This systemic devaluation of care is closely related to the history of patriarchy. Care work has been devalued due to its association with the household, which is considered part of the feminine private domain as opposed to the masculine public domain where work is recognized and valued. In most societies around the world, a woman's gender role has included the obligation to attend to the needs of the members of the family, especially children, the elderly, and the sick, and to manage and carry out various household chores. Women are expected to accept care responsibilities without compensation or acknowledgement, since it is seen as a God-given or nature-ordained duty. Failure to perform such services could invite the penalty of severe censure or even domestic violence. While a patriarchal order values achievement, autonomy, and independence in men, self-abnegation, devotion to the family, and sacrifice are expected of women. Women are often expected to assume almost the entire responsibility for care labor at home, which comes at the cost of limiting their freedom to choose their life path and to them missing opportunities to develop their capability. The injustice of being made almost entirely responsible for caring labor inhibits millions of women from pursuing their higher education or participating fully in the workforce as equals with men. The revaluation of the concept of care thus cannot be achieved without decoupling it from patriarchal gender norms. Such efforts would naturally have to begin with the family, the primary space where both caring needs are addressed and conceptions of masculinity and femininity are formed, acted out, and enforced. Given that these gender norms are embedded in the structures of society, transforming them is a complex process that takes time. To be sure, groups, organizations, and individuals working over many decades have already achieved significant progress in establishing the equality of women and men as an incontestable normative principle. Yet much remains to be achieved in translating this principle into action. The surest foundation for replacing oppressive gender norms with egalitarian and just conceptions lies in the concepts and practices that young minds learn from their earliest years in the family. In this regard, by sharing equally in domestic care work, not only for our boys learning to be fair and unselfish, and girls learning that they are socially equal to boys, The practice of care by its very nature will call forth and develop the nurturing and caring capabilities within them. Caring for another human being requires capability and discipline as much as the qualities of love and compassion. Rather than being temporarily moved by altruistic sentiments, it calls for consistency, commitment, and trustworthiness in the caregiver. The caregiver is often required to place the care receiver's needs above their own. These capabilities are built through practice over a long period of time, and the intimate space of the family is the most natural setting where the learning process associated with this can begin. The challenge, thus, before the present and future generation is not just to create families where the equality of the sexes is a lived reality, but also to build a society where care is highly valued for its seminal role in providing the conditions for the full development of human potential. While care is a means to progress, being caring in the sense of manifesting the qualities and abilities needed to actively support the progress of another person, or to be a responsible steward to the natural world, is in itself the mark of a morally and socially well-developed person. Thus, in the context of the family, the challenge is not only to ensure that all participate in carrying out domestic responsibilities, but also to raise young boys and girls who aspire to build their capabilities to serve and care for other human beings and the planet. With these initial comments, I'd like to take the discussion forward and invite our speakers to share their initial remarks. Before introducing our first speaker, I would also like to mention to our audience who are joining us on Zoom and also on Facebook that they should participate by sharing their comments and questions in the Q&A box for the speakers. We will have time after the second speaker, and at the end, after all four speakers have spoken, we will have time to take your questions and comments with the speakers. Our first speaker today is Ms. Bhavna Isar, who is the founder and CEO of the social venture Caregiver Sati, which is a high-tech and high-touch platform that supports family caregivers through a care navigation system that aims to ease access to resources like advice, information, community, professional services, and learning tools. She consults with organizations in building caregiver-friendly and compassionate workplaces that are resilient and innovative. Without taking more time, I hand over to Bhavna.
Cannot tell you the delight and excitement that I felt on receiving your email, Professor Fazli, and for the very idea that such a forum has been constructed. So my congratulations, and I am so looking forward to listen to the other panel members today. Given that we come from perhaps different experiences and different perspectives, but all headed in the same direction. So a little bit in addition to what I do and the introduction, what I'd like for you to keep in mind is that I grew up in a household that had relocated post-partition to Delhi. And by virtue of various generations and many magical things, I grew up in a household where gender discrimination was not a thing. I grew up believing and never being told that I could not do something because I was a girl. It was something that I took for granted until many years later that I realized what a blessing and a gift it was. It is. Um, with that in the background, of course, I have many, many stories to tell about how that has enabled and disabled me. But one of the other things that I'd like for you to know is that I was in my teens when my very able-bodied pilot father had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And he was fairly young. And just last week, it is 24 years since he passed. But I saw caregiving up close and personal. And that is the motivation in the sense that, one, I never saw myself as a caregiver, but I did see my mother as the primary caregiver. And I was very concerned because long-term care or difficult care impacts the whole family. Certainly the nurturance in the family, the type of family determines the values that we carry, not just within the family, but outside, but it also determines our outlook to life and so many other things. This experience impacted me significantly, but also gave me the purpose of my life, which is caregiver Sathi. And I believe the purpose of my life is to shine the light on family caregivers who are invisible, unrecognized, underappreciated, and underserved. Um, it is interesting that most family caregivers are women, and perhaps something that I was blind to is become a part of my mission to ensure gender equality. I do come from a background of having worked in the corporate world for a very long time, and as a wannabe geek, I do rely on technology a lot. So I am going to use a set of slides. Please allow me that a minute as I bring up my slides to talk to you about the very exciting topic today. Can you see my screen? All right, it's a very wide topic, care and compassion and community in current times. Needless to say, what I'm going to talk about is significantly informed from the work that I do over the last 10 years in building Caregiver Sathi, as well as my life experience primarily. Of course, along the way, I have done some reading and research around the topic as well. My favorite story is that of Dr. Margaret Mead. Dr. Margaret Mead, as you know, is a legendary anthropologist who was once asked, what is the first sign of civilization? And in a conference, and this was mentioned in a book, that she said, for me, the first sign of civilization is a healed femur bone. And although the person who asked the question was probably expecting organized living, farming, tools, etc., was surprised to find a healed femur bone as the response to a question around civilization. She went on to explain that a healed femur bone is the sign that someone bothered to take the wounded person, bound up the wound, and ensure that they healed. In the animal kingdom, a broken femur bone would mean sure shot death. But if there was a healed femur bone, it meant someone cared enough. So care to me is the first sign of civilization. It is the very essence of being a human being. And as we go further, what I'd like for you to see in this picture and make a note of is, who do you think in this picture is the caregiver? Oops, sorry. I'd love to hear what your imagery and understanding is. On many an occasion, when I show this picture, many people gravitate towards the elder lady and think of her as the caregiver. Many see the other women as the caregiver. But to me, and many times to many people, anybody in this picture could be a caregiver. And my favorite one is that little boy on the bottom right. Keep that in your mind as to who is a caregiver and who do we see as a caregiver as I go through the rest of my comments. I'm going to take a quote from Rosalind Carter. Rosalind Carter has been a big inspiration for Caregiver Sathi and a big advocate for caregivers. She was also the wife of Jimmy Carter, the president in the US. And she said something which has been a beacon of light for us. There are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. Many of us will be in one or more of this category through our lives, but it is an interesting lens with which to see that we are all caregivers, and in being caregivers, in caring for someone else, we actually live a purposeful life. What does care in the modern times look like, and what is it? I'm going to show you a short film, and I'm going to make sure that there is sound. So I will just share this again. And I'm unable to share sound. Dr. Fazli, 1 second. I'm not able to share sound for some reason. Let me see if I can do something else. Sorry about this. I was going to show you a film. Ouch. Should I just ignore that? Can you let me know if you can hear this? Is it audible?
No, the audio is not coming through. The audio isn't coming through, Bhavna.
Yes. I'm so sorry about that. I'm just going to try another way. Okay. We will just live with this. I cannot show you this film. Sorry, I don't know, for some reason, I'm not able to share sound on the screen, but I will go ahead and continue with the rest of the presentation. This is basically a collection of feedback from the world of caregivers, the invisible warriors in our everyday life, who go on to give a very poignant statement about how caregiving is a very thankless job in today's world. Um, If you looked around, you would find many people like Sunita, who is a caregiver to her mother-in-law, but is unable to talk about caregiving at the workplace, or Sunil, who is a caregiver to his wife, who has had dementia for multiple years, but is not able to get good help. You might also have some other cases like Ashima, who is a caregiver to her brother, who is the primary caregiver and is concerned about the health of their mother. While there are caregivers all around us and care that needs to be delivered, not just in bringing up children, in ailing people, in aging, it is ubiquitous, it is omnipresent, and yet unrecognized. In fact, the labor of care is probably not yet well understood. So what does demystifying care today look like? If we were to look at the social narrative around caregiving and caregivers, it is at the intersection of very complex and multidimensional challenges. At the socio-cultural level in India, it is caregiving is noble, it's a familial duty. We live in a world where living longer is valued, or longevity is precious for some reason as compared to living a full life. There have been for years in our patriarchal setup, gender and role stereotypes that make women the primary holders of care, and unpaid care work is a part of gender roles. Mental health and its implications seems to be an emerging area, but it is still inaccessible to many. It is taboo for many, and the services that are rendered through mental health are also fairly intangible. And the caregiving is at the intersection of these three ideas. And because it is at the intersection, it makes it even more complex and multidimensional. There are some statistics, of course, around the fact that unpaid care work is large. It is very significant in India, significantly more for women and girls to the extent of 10x that of men. At minimum wages, the 3.26 billion hours of unpaid care work that women and girls do on a daily basis could be estimated to be a GDP of 1 trillion US dollars. This does not account for the fact that women could actually be rocket scientists, or they could be doctors, or they could be at very different levels of the economy. And it is in India, certainly 20 times the healthcare spends and 8 times the education spends that we currently have. Juxtapose that with the fact that we are all caregivers. What is the impact of caregiving? Of course, long-term care and providing caregiving has multiple implications at an individual, family, as well as societal levels. And it does have mental health implications as well. What I'm going to talk to you about is the fact that we don't even have a term equivalent to a caregiver in any of the Indian languages. So if you can think of a nice term that is equivalent to a caregiver in any language, let me know. Most of the times, if you were to do a Google search, you would come up with terms like Dekhbhal Karta, Sevak, Sahayak, Timardar, Aya. When I ask it in large groups, people would often say Ma. But it is unlikely that you will use these terms for a family caregiver. The important point here to note is that identities and roles of caregivers are deeply enmeshed. And when it is a part of my identity. It is who I am. It is, I'm a good daughter, I'm a good wife, a good partner. And I do not see the role of caregiving. It becomes difficult for me to step out of my identity, to step into a role, and therefore take help for it. And that is the primary and the biggest challenge around caregiving, especially in the South Asian context. Caregiving is a gendered role. And if we were to understand the gender dynamic, I would make an assertion that both men and women make great caregivers, although in our everyday language, there are masculine and feminine stereotypes that talk about certain traits, which are like muscles that are better developed in boys, the masculine muscles, and the feminine muscles that are expected for women to be better developed. Over the last few years, one would find, and I am one of those women who have invested more time and energy in building our masculine muscles and not necessarily building our feminine muscles. And it might be a case for us that both men and women build both sides of our personality. Of course, UN has also recognized that unpaid care-related work needs to be recognized, redistributed, and rebalanced in order for us to enable a gender-equal world. I take a lot of
Yes,
inspiration what Dr.
in 2 minutes.
Yes, I will bring this to an end. What Dr. Fazli didn't tell you about me is that I am a motorcyclist, and being a motorcyclist informs a lot of not just who I am, what I do, but how I see the world. I see care and caregiving like the uncharted terrain that one must navigate. If you know that over the various revolutions, the Industrial Revolution led to the automation and us recognizing physical labor or moving from physical labor to intellectual labor. And now that we are entering the world of AI and ML, it might be worth a while to recognize emotional labor and value it for what it is in our world. The labor of care has multiple elements, and it is like holding a glass of water. Now, if I were to ask you how long can you hold a glass of water, you might say 2 minutes, 20 minutes, depending on your capability. While the glass of water might not be varying, um, holding care or that glass of water for 2 days, 20 days, 2 years could mean different things. Also, whether or not you have the ability to shift your hands, whether or not you have the ability to change your posture, whether or not you are in a comfortable environment could also impact your ability to hold that glass for a very long period of time. And imagine if you were holding that glass of water or that labor or of care while watching someone helpless and vulnerable and not necessarily be able to help them also impacts not just the quality of care that you are able to provide, the amount of labor that it takes, and invariably the kind of stress that it might cause you or burnout that it might result in. What does navigating in modern times look like? I think care has at its very core compassion. Compassion can mean many things to many people, but I would like for you to consider that compassion is empathy in action, and it is not just your ability to be able to step into another person's shoes, but to perhaps be step back out of those shoes and be able to do something about it. So compassion would also mean a certain quality of detachment, a certain quality of being able to take a decision that is valuable and right, not just for that person, but for yourself simultaneously, in the short run and the long term. So it is complex and it has multiple facets, but being compassion is at the very core of being a caring person or bringing care into our everyday life. And I would assert that compassion is not just a practice, but a teachable skill. The only thing is that it needs to be nurtured and it needs to be built over a period of time it is a skill that can be built by healthy selves that can heal themselves, and individuals who have a quality of self-awareness and understanding, and a certain element of spiritual well-being. That means being gracious in receiving and grateful in service. One of the ways that this can be built is by volunteering your time and skills, something that is niswarth seva. So when we care for someone else without any expectation, we build a muscle of compassion. At the end of the day, as Ramdas says, we finally carry each other. And living a full life would mean elements of caring for yourself and for the others. I'm going to take a pause and stop this here.
Thank you so much, Bhavna, for really laying out for us, in a sense, in all its richness, what care implies in terms of the lived reality experience of caring and its vital importance for society. Since we are short on time, I'll now invite our next speaker, Professor Radhika Chopra, who is a professor of sociology, retired professor of sociology from the University of Delhi. She has authored many books such as Amritsar 1984, A City Remembers, Militant and Migrant, The Politics and Social History of Punjab, and she has edited Reframing Masculinities, Narrating the Supportive Practices of Men, among other works. I'd like to invite Professor Chopra to make her comments. I will start the PowerPoint.
Thank you. Just wanted to know if you can hear me. Okay. Okay. Well, let me just begin by thanking you for inviting me to speak on a area of care and caring in our world today, which is honestly one of, probably given the uncertainties of our world, so extraordinarily important at this moment of time. So I have devolved the responsibility of caring and sharing the screen upon you. So for the moment, I think what I'm going to talk about is, in a sense, understanding the kinds of issues that Bhavna has raised just now, and so emotively raised for us to consider. But I want to just add to that, if you will, or extend some of those ideas to asking the question, do men care? And if they do, how do we recognize care work of men? So I want to hark back to a moment in our very recent contemporary lives, not just the pandemic and the lockdown in India, but the extraordinary visuals that emerged from that about migrant lives in particular. So if I may ask you to just share with us the first screen. Yes. So we became almost suddenly familiar with the fact of migrant in our lives, in our cities, around us, every day, whom we had not seen. And they actually, the visuals of them walking back home, because they were literally not just compelled to leave by the lockdown, there was nothing for them to do in the cities, but in a way they were expelled from the cities, and the long walks home, which were globally spoken about, is really a reflection of what that moment meant to so many different people in very, very different ways. I don't think, and I think we all know this, that the experiences of the pandemic were identical. They were dreadful for everyone, but they were not certainly identical. Could we go to the next slide? So why, after all, did migrants leave? This 2020 reverse migration, it's one of the largest recorded in history. And while we think of the partition of India as a very huge moment of migration, this is of people going back home. And it's quite important given migration patterns of mobilities and movements. And the question comes, why did migrants go home? Why did they walk home? The second and third question that I want to link to that is how I want to move into understanding the structures of care and the structures of caregiving, of male forms of caregiving in the pandemic world, and what in fact constituted or what makes up, how do we understand pandemic care work in particular, and why is it important to understand it? So I think what I'm going to just very quickly do is just to ask Arash to go to the next slide, if you would. Yeah. Now, one of the things that's really striking to me is how we literally did not see the conditions of life of migrants in our cities. So many of them lived in this very bare circumstance of existence, under flyovers, in sort of nooks and crannies and so on. We passed them by every day. It's not just that we didn't see them, it's also because the conditions under which they lived and therefore had to leave had as much to do with the context of urban life and the response of cities towards migrants. So it was mere life. They just lived there and nothing more. We often forget, or we often eclipse and cloak migrant lives, urban migrants, under the cloak of livelihood, but we don't actually see it in any sense as related to care. And I think the pandemic honestly brought some of these things to the surface for us. So the long walk home, it seems to be brought to the surface the extreme disparity between those who live securely in cities and those who live in extreme precarity, and therefore cannot literally afford to continue to live in cities when something like a pandemic or anything else, floods currently in our world, strike. Okay, could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Nevertheless, I mean, what's really interesting is that migrants, even though they went back in such huge numbers and under such trying conditions, even before the pandemic actually was declared to be somewhat safer, or the waves we thought were receding, migrants began to return in quite significant numbers. And what is interesting to me about those returns is the set of people who did return. And census and survey statistic data tell us that amongst India's internal migrants, 50% who are urban male migrants move in search of employment. And these are the people who primarily returned. Most of all, it was younger men of poorer households who were mobile and migrant, and they were, in a sense, the center-way boys of underprivileged homes, and they were the first ones to return. And you can see that even here in this slide, the reverse migration, in a sense, of 2020 is the aberration. What we see here, this pavement dweller living under the flyover, etc., that low-income migrants do return. their entire life depends on their mobility and their ability to be in the city for this, not just for themselves, but for the sake of their families. Most migrants are between the ages of 16 and 40. I'm just giving you these very broad statistics in order to just point out who we are talking about when we come to the aspect of pandemic care work. So these 16 to 40-year-olds, who are the bulk of migrants, urban migrants, are also the ones who inhabit semi-permanent or employed in undocumented, informal sectors, gray areas of the economy, and increasingly gig workers, that is, those who are part of e-commerce. Could we go to the next slide, pandemic care work? Yeah, okay. So what did the pandemic do for us? The first thing it did was to introduce new protocols of social life. So I'm going to jump straight into the pandemic after giving you this very sort of broad picture of who the migrants are, who are the focus of my attention, my talk today. So pandemic, we became familiar with two things, primarily. They were on the tips of the tongue of just about everybody, especially urban dwellers, middle class urban dwellers, I may add. Social distancing, work from home. So COVID-19 actually introduced to us two things: the expansion of work from home and the concern of work from home vis-a-vis also keeping safe distances. At the same time, it's odd how keeping social distance and work from home also gave rise to e-commerce in such a huge way. At the same, given that, but combined with safety, the protocols of safety demanded that safety protocols actually became a very high selling point of e-commerce, e-businesses, especially those who were part of delivery systems, which most e-commerce, after all, is. So I'm sure you, each of us, must have been drawn to little advertisements or little slogans that came up on WhatsApp promoting different kinds of e-businesses, promoting the idea that the business cared for you. We got you, they said. The last thing you want to worry about is your food. So the question of care services of various kinds becoming one of the fastest growing segments of the digital economy, safety protocols as a selling point, we really need to ask, so then who was providing the safety and who carried the burden of care? Who carried the burden of safety on their shoulders? Can I request the next slide, please? Thank you. So again, this is the kind of image that was circulating widely, ordered on WhatsApp. The delivery boy will definitely have a kit which will keep you safe. So the delivery boy had to really be someone who was concerned for the safety of the person who was accepting the delivery, keeping the idea of social distance as much upon his body as he possibly could. So e-businesses were also saying to you, and they were sometimes sending little feedback forms, which you had to fill, sometimes delivered with your goods, and the safety, and the delivery boy had to give you this little form that you had to tick about how well he had observed safety protocols, whether or not he did have, it was recorded that his temperature was all right, that is, his body was safe, in other words, in order for you to literally accept the delivery. So the things that came to your door were those that were given by these kind of young men who were migrant, who did this work, who ensured, if you will, the fact of safe delivery. The next slide, please. Okay. So just as we became accustomed to seeing migrants living under flyovers without really always focusing on them, it seems to me that one of the things that changed on our urban landscape and was really prominent on our urban city landscapes was the masked delivery man, delivery lad, I'd call him, moving through different parts of the city. Whether they were food delivery services or the cab drivers, they were actually masked for almost, or some of them wearing their PPE kits for almost 14 and 16 hours a day. All external signs of wellness, the body signs, the bodies of these delivery men became the focus of a lot of monitoring and regulation and record. And this is very close to the way that women's bodies were monitored for such a long time, in a sense around reproduction. Here, it is the reproduction of households and their abilities to continue that really became focused upon the bodies of these delivery lads. So the delivery lads' observance or slippage of safety protocols, as well as wellness and unwellness, the body became a particular focus of attention during the work from home, the safety distancing, social distancing protocols. We go to the next slide, Arash. So then who cares? I think it seems to me that it is the pandemic at one level that does introduce an idea for us to think about shifts in the gendering of care. I think the pandemic immobility of the work from home customer and the necessary mobility of the delivery lad is something we need to focus on, because it asks us to look at the question, how the question of who cares. I think the question shifts the responsibility of caring for safety from individuals caring for their own safety to those who must provide safety for others. Young migrant men who, as I said, form the bulk of this population of delivery boys, actually became the ones who had to carry the burden of ensuring care and safety. Just as a quick point, I mean, it was these young men who we often don't even think of as caregivers. And I take Bhavna's point, but I would also like to extend it to say that yes, within the family, in the household circumstance, within the domestic circumstance, the identifying of caregivers is diverse and does devolve upon a whole set of people. Caregiving is not about one caregiver, but a whole set of them, a whole family. It seems to me that same analogy needs to be extended into the public domain, into a much wider circumstance of trying to understand care. That it's this young male migrant who kept our kitchens going, who got the nappies at the door, who kept our teeth brushed with the toothpastes and the toothbrushes that were delivered by so many delivery lads who came to the door and then kept their distance. And it isn't just a social distance, it's also, if you will, a kind of a pushing out of particular people who are regarded as unsafe in themselves, but absolutely necessary for the baby's nappies to be there, for you to do all the safety things for the body of the baby. I'm going to the next slide, if you would, please. It seems to me that one of the things that became quite important to consider is how do we understand the doing of care? How do we understand the doing of care work? Is there risk entailed in provisioning care and safety? Workers in the healthcare sector certainly had to ferry, and we know this, we've seen visuals of this, we've seen promotions of this, we've got WhatsApp messages about this, that workers in the healthcare sector will deliver medicines and masks and oximeters, thermometers, even oxygen cylinders to your door, but they will do so by keeping a social distance and trying to, if you will, make their bodies safe for you. So mobility was essential. Male workers were the ones who had to be mobile, and it was they who had to adopt the safety protocol equipments of masks, gloves, PPEs wherever necessary, and many of them were essential, especially in the first phase of the pandemic. Because what actually this does is that it introduces, almost devolves almost entirely upon the individual delivery worker, the privatization of the risk of caring for others. I might add that this is one of the aspects of caregiving that shares an analogy with women's care work, particularly in the household, which is not only unremunerated and undocumented, but wholly unrecognized. And it seems to me that the workers' observances of safety, wearing the safety equipment 14 and 16 hours a day, trying to keep this safety angle and social distance alive, was very much a part of care work, unrecognized, unregulated, undocumented, unpaid for, not part of any e-commerce account books at all. So the question, so I'm going to just ask you to go to the next very familiar slide to us. I think a very familiar
If you could
image.
just conclude in like 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm going to be finishing. So here are people who were very much part of our lives. We saw them, and yet we kept a distance from them. And they kept their distance, it seems to me, from us, because what I see on the bodies of these workers, what I understand from looking at this visual is what is it, what are the significances that the mask as a protocol conveys to us about the lives of migrant workers through the pandemic. So just to end, maybe the last slide, Arash. Just to end. Now, while the pandemic and its migrations compelled us to re-examine what care work actually was, where it was to be found and located, who was actually doing the care work, it seems to me that the gendering of care also depends, the understanding of what is care really depends on how we define it. So what is care? Where do we see it? Who cares? Is a very key set of questions that I think will give us a different sense of how caring forms of care work can be understood and can be gendered in more than a single gendered or a unigendered way. So thank you. I'll just end there.
Thank you so much, Professor Chopra, for really bringing out the complexity of the challenge that, especially that has become visible with, with the pandemic, and also shedding light on the structural nature of the problem, and invisibilization of so many migrant workers who, in a sense, the burden of care work got shifted on to them, but in a sense, the same kind of, I won't say stigma, maybe stigma is too strong a word, but the same kind of devaluation that one witnessed in traditional settings was visible, which raises a couple of questions. Maybe we could quickly take one or two. I would request the participants to please share their questions in the Q&A box, both now and we'll take more questions when we after the fourth speaker has shared her remarks. But one question that comes immediately to mind is, one of the participants asked about how care, and this relates to what both the speakers shared, which is how the values of care, the importance of care, the capabilities of caring can be inculcated through the school curriculum. And but then when one looks at now the structural factors that, in a sense, devalue care, the question really becomes of how can the vital importance of care be recognized in a system where, basically, like what Professor Chopra was sharing, it's a system which has placed economic growth at the center, and there are forms of discrimination which serve that pursuit of profit. So what we are saying essentially is that a different set of values, a different need to be the organizing principle for society. I don't know if either of you have thoughts on what you think it would take to move in that direction, whether it is bringing these values into the education system. And I think the next set of speakers are very suited for taking this discussion further, because they're going to discuss more on these aspects. But it would be just to hear your thoughts.
May I quickly respond?
Yes, please.
I think sometimes when we ask a small question, we also imagine that it takes a hell of a lot to shift thoughts and to make matters better for ourselves. I think sometimes small questions give us little answers as well, which are as pertinent. And I think it doesn't take much to think about care more deeply, more carefully, and understand it better. All we need to do is open our eyes. It's a small act physically. It's a small act in bodily terms, but it's a huge difference that it makes to our world if we just see what is in front of us. And I think that it's in that context that I decided to speak of such a huge moment of the pandemic, focusing on migrants who aren't normally the ones we would associate with the discussions on emotional care and caregiving. We don't bring these two together necessarily. And yet, the moment we open our eyes just that little bit, you do see what care entailed. You do see who actually risked themselves and their lives and their um, disease, if you will, the risks of getting disease by conveying care to your doorstep. And that's all really was the import of what I was trying to say.
I absolutely loved your presentation, Dr. Chopra. It was heartwarming and enlightening, and just very, very nice. I'm certainly going to quote it in many forums. What I'd like to contribute to this conversation,
with acknowledgements.
100%. Due credits, most certainly. Thank you for being my teacher today. What I'd like to say is, if you look at it from a very economic sense, I believe through my experience, I believe the two things that are important in a dynamic, changing world are one, innovation and resilience, both of which require empathy and compassion. Having the ability to practice compassion or understand another person who may not be getting access, who may not be getting, equality, justice, whatever, leads to innovation. If you truly want to be innovative and if you truly want to be resilient, you have to have, you have to learn to care for others and yourself simultaneously.
Thank you so much, Bhavna, for your comments, and Professor Chopra. I keep remembering your analogy of the glass and the person holding it as an analogy for care. And I think after a point, it's no more the question of just how much strength or standing capacity you have. The question is how much structure there exists to support you, and what kind of system society has created to ensure that this is sustainable, this is just, exactly like you said. And I think that's an excellent point at which to invite our next speaker, who is going to look at the political economy of care, which is really, it's impossible to talk about this unless one really looks at the state, the market, the structures that exist, which both facilitate and inhibit what possibilities exist. So our next speaker is Sudeshana Sengupta, who is an independent researcher and consultant. I invite her to please share her thoughts with us.
Thank you, Dr. Arash. Am I audible? Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity. And really, I've been working on the issue of care since 2008, when Rajni Palriwala and Nita of CWDS was part of the 8-country study on the political economy of care. And after so many years, for last 2-3 years, we suddenly see, probably because of the pandemic, that care as an issue is getting visibility. And thank you for taking it on. So how do I define care? It has been broadly spoken about, and also I use the feminist scholars' definition, mainly those who had worked on social reproduction. It is about regenerating past, present, and future labor. So why past, present, and future labor? And when I say labor, I do not mean only paid labor. I mean labor for all sorts of work. So past, because people who had been part of the workforce and also have done all the work, but not able to work now, them, the people who are right now putting their labor, so regenerating them and reproducing them, their own labor for the next day and for the future by giving birth to the future workforce and people who work in future and take care of them. So the care work is not limited to only regenerating human life. It is beyond regenerating human life, and I think Monica will speak about it. And before I move into the social and political economy of care, I just want to point out that the scope of my talk is limited to care work, which is direct and indirect. Direct in the form of direct care in the form of child care or caring of the ailing or the disabled member of the family, and indirect care in the form of cooking, fetching water, etc. This is the broad spectrum of the care within which my talk is located. And my lens is child care, because my work for so many years had been mainly on child care. So maybe many times I'll be using child care synonymously with care. Please forgive me for that, but please no, I mean, it is just to say that when I say care, I mean child care, but care is beyond child care, of course. So who do we see providing child care in and around us? It is mainly women within the families, or we see domestic care workers in our middle class houses who are providing child care to our children in the family. So we see mainly women, and hence there is a feminization and familialization attached with the imagination or perception of care. But is family the only institution? If we look at it, the state has actually acknowledged childcare as one of its responsibilities by putting it within the labor laws. The Factories Act is 1948, which has a provision of childcare for women factory workers. The Maternity Benefit Act is of 1962, which is only, unfortunately, for the formal establishments, but also it recognizes the state responsibility of care. So, and also through different welfare programs like Rajiv Gandhi Creche Scheme, which is right now going to be Palna scheme. So different welfare schemes on childcare, they are also, when we look at that policy articulation, we see that it is to enable women, especially women from economically marginalized communities, to enable them to join paid work. So in the imagination of the state, when it sees care, when it articulates care, it imagines women, because child care provisions are for women care workers, which has changed now. The Maternity Benefit Act, which was actually amended in 2017, it says that establishments which have more than 50 employees will have childcare. But that didn't happen overnight. This needed continuous engagement with the state. But what I'm trying to underline is that in our imagination, childcare is feminized and childcare is familiarized, and state provides childcare only when it recognizes that the family, actually there is in the family, there is an absence of an adult caregiver in the form of a woman or a mother, then only childcare comes in. So the entire informal sector, which employs 96% of women, they are not counted as economic agents. The formal sector women workers are actually imagined as contributing towards the economy. And hence, for those women, state looks at providing childcare. Secondly, in the welfare programs, it again imagines childcare, women, but also the way the welfare programs are funded, it's under functioning, its inadequacy, its non-regulation. It shows that there is an apathy or indifference in looking at the 96% of women workers, their need for childcare and the need for the care so that the children actually grow up to their full potential, to recognize that their well-being as an important responsibility of the state. And that apathy that apathy comes out in the form of non-regulation of quality, less budget, less infrastructure, etc. And hence, even though employers are responsible, even though the state is responsible, even though communities are responsible, they all get away, and we don't question who does not get away. It's the woman in the family who is penalized and who is isolated if he or she does not provide care. And this invisibilization is actually beneficial. The state is getting away by not investing on human resource and other infrastructure. The employer is getting away by not investing, by not hiring women. Women are suffering because women cannot get into full employment because they have to weave in all their types of activities. And this is actually beneficial for all structures to function well. So then we just ask the question that how, among all these responsible institutions, which Shahra Rizvi has called the care diamond, where state, market, NGOs, and families who are identified as institutions who are to provide care, why do we see only, we have discussed why we see the family only. Right now, we focus on the role of the state within that care diamond. How do we see that? So within the policy framework, the laws, the programs on the ground, we find state as a provider and as a regulator. So as a provider, state provides Anganwadi centers, which are 14 lakhs right now in the country. And when the care needs are intense, which means when the children are below 3 years of age, that during that time, the entire spectrum of service is home-based. So there is an assumption that there will be a caregiver, most probably the mother at home. So the child receives immunization, the child receives growth monitoring once in 3 months, and the child receives dry rations, which is once a week. So there is no question of providing personal care, center-based care within the Anganwadi centers. It is mainly the service which is provided at the center is for the 3 to 6s, which is in the form of early childhood care and education. Apart from that, there are welfare programs which are not fully state funded. It is basically they are basically grant-in aid program, which state runs in support of NGOs. NGOs are the implementers, and the state provides a part of the funding, but nowhere, neither for the Anganwadi workers nor for the creche workers under the welfare programs, there is no guideline for providing them minimum wages. Only the guidelines under the Maternity Benefit Act amended of 2017 for providing creches for formal sector enterprises, there is a guideline for caregivers to be provided minimum wages. And also labor laws which have creches is functioning since 1948. There was an RTI provided, given by Dr. Vandana Prasad, asking how many construction workers are covered under labor law creches. Believe me, there was no data available. And she went till the commissioner, there was no data, and then it could not be followed up. So what is the result? The result is not class neutral. The result is poorer families. Women in poorer families, they stretch themselves to take care of the children, of the elderly, of the disabled. They stretch themselves and they also have to do paid work. So they choose paid work, or I don't know whether it is choose or forced to choose paid work, which is near their homes, which has flexible types of working hours so that they can weave all their responsibilities into it. And as a result, the child, the young child whose brain develops 85% during the first 5 years, the child faces care deficit, and the child, as a result, we are not able to get out of malnutrition. We are not able to get out of rich human capital, the potential which we as a young nation have. And we are talking about demographic dividends. I think if we do not look at care, we do not look at child care, this demographic dividend is not possible, because human society exists not to make profits, but to reproduce itself as a humankind, which is the primary objective. Profit comes next. And I will just end by saying, so when we think about the state's responsibility cannot be a gender neutral, a class neutral policy program environment. It needs to take into consideration what all are impacting lives, what all are creating barriers for women to participate fully into the economy, into the society. So care is actually nested into this larger thinking, and the more our vision expands, we will benefit and we will grow stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeshna. This was really an excellent introduction to the kind of policies that exist and the limitations that come from those policies, state public policies with regard to care, which then also reflects the way care is perceived by the state and the powers that be, and how then and then you so nicely help us understand how that is linked to the subjugation of women, because then the burden of quality of unregulated welfare policies, it is tacitly assumed that that gap will be filled by the woman at home, and the most the heaviest burden falls on the economically underprivileged classes, which is really the large segment of the population who can't hire caregivers, because again the more upper middle class would hire another woman again to compensate for that deficit. Really, I think there's a lot to unpack, but let's move on to requesting our next speaker, Dr. Monica Banerjee, who is a qualitative researcher on gender, education, and livelihoods, and has done a lot of work in this area to share her comments with us.
Thank you so much, Professor Fazli. Thank you for inviting me to this very important panel. Um, I'm going to be talking about, already, there's always beneficial to be the last because the stage has been set and a lot of things that I wanted to say have been covered by my, co-panelists. What I'm trying to do, and I would, also apologize before I even present that probably the thoughts that I'm going to be presenting will sound very fragmented. And that's because what I'm presenting today is something very new to me in the sense that I've just started working on it. But I still feel that it's important to share ideas because by sharing ideas, your ideas become more comprehensive. And so where I'm kind of probably lacking, where there are gaps, I would be able to hear from everyone and, will be able to probably concretize it in a better manner. So already the care debate has been there. And as Sudeshna has said that, she has been part of it since 2008. I have been part of it since 2017, 18. And I mean, it has been there. There's been a lot of conversations about what is really care work, what is unpaid care work. So just to understand care, and I think Radhika's last slide, which talked about what is care, who cares, where is care. I think it's very important to understand the gendered and the feminized understanding of care that I think Sudeshna also was trying to talk about. Because even when care is done within the household, who is caring and what kind of, the invisibilization is kind of attached to where it is being done and who is doing it. And the idea of, why care becomes something that women always keep central to all their decision making is important to understand. A lot of times, in conversations, as researchers, we found that people say, "Arey, ye to uska choice tha." It was a woman's choice to stay back home after a child, or it was a woman's choice to be a homemaker. A lot of times, women also say that, I chose part-time work because it was something that I could manage my family well, or my children were growing up. But is choice really an individual thing? Is something that I would like everybody to think about. Is choice really apolitical? Is choice really so much a personal thing that nothing else affects it? Women tend to do majority of the care work because they also have internalized over a period of time, because of the gender division of labor, that the core responsibility is care. I mean, the whole breadwinner model where men are the breadwinners and women are the, supposed to be inside the households, looking after, reproduce, whereas men produce, has kind of, been working. And one thinks that this is something that has worked well for the society. But it works well because, as Sudeshna has tried to imply, that it is very beneficial for certain aspects. So for the state to not invest in human capital, for the market to not invest in the kind of subsidized human resource that they are getting every morning, the labor force that they're getting, who is well nourished, who is well educated. But the kind of work that is happening within the family is an important factor. And those are aspects that require a lot of conversations. But what I'm trying to bring in today is the current buzz about climate change, and what is really happening in this new era, where though climate change has been happening for years now, but the conversations about climate change are so separate from what is happening inside the family, that it sometimes irks one, that is it really something that is only happening somewhere outside? Is it only about nature, the environment, about not having trees, or is it also something which is personally affecting each one within the family? And who is it affecting? Is the effect really equal to everyone? Is it okay? Is it okay to say that where I am standing and where somebody else is standing, we all are getting affected by climate change in the same manner? And then within that effect, the impact, who is really, when it comes to bearing the burden and also carrying it, taking it forward, who is really taking it forward? So that's where I'm coming in. And it is well documented, and as Sudeshna has also pointed out, that within the family, majority of the care work is done by women. We are also living in an era where farming is mostly now done by women, because the kind of precarity that farming and agriculture itself is going through, the insecurities that are attached to it. More and more men are now moving out of farming and going into more wage employment within the tertiary sector, mostly in the informal sector, and women are being left behind to look after the farms, to do the subsistence work within the. So now the added care work, apart from the direct and the indirect that Sudeshna was talking about, there is also the environmental care work that also women are doing. They have been doing it for years now, but now more of the burden is being handled by women. And with the way the climate change is happening, the forest, and the kind of mitigation and adaptation strategies that are being adopted, one finds that the burden is falling and is becoming more intense for women. It also depends on where one is in terms of the context or intersectionality. So in terms of caste, in terms of class, in terms of geography, where you are located, the intensity, the effect is lot more. The impact is lot more, and the more the impact, the inequality also is increasing. So now, how does climate change really impact? So if we look at, say, for example, the cyclone, since we are one of the most cyclone prone countries, keeping two of our the majority of our states and in the coastal region, uh, what really happens once a cyclone takes place? So studies have shown that after a cyclone or a big disaster that takes place, most men tend to migrate out of the villages to look for work. It is the women who are left back. The intensity of now the care work, which was already there for women to do, intensifies, because now they not only have to look after the already existing care work that they were doing, but also have to now work towards uh, you know uh, the the change, the climate change, the disaster that has happened, the destruction that has taken place. They're also having to look after that. So if we just kind of look at what kind of impact climate change happens, we see that poverty intensifies, poverty increases in most of these places. Food insecurity increases. Water, fuel, fodder, all of these shortages increases. Health impact, both physical as well as mental health impact. In Maharashtra, we see year after year suicides are happening, and what are left behind are farmer widows who have to look after the families. The mental health that they are going through every time the rains don't come or more rains come through is something that is hardly talked about. We only talk about a drought or a bad rain in very technological terms, or farmer suicide is just becomes a data number, but what is left behind is not really discussed. Migration and displacement, again, when because of migration and displacement, more and more women and children are left behind. And of course, conflict, when there is shortage of food, when there is shortage of water, when there's shortage of most resources, conflict increases. Studies have also shown that when there is, because there is a large impact on livelihood, intimate domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual harassment of women, all of those things also increase, because the frustration, the mental health really it gets is affected. But when we look at the climate intervention policies, while majority of the policies in the country as well as internationally bring in the gender lens, and they talk about gender in a manner that they understand the severity and the unequal way that climate change impacts different genders. When you look at the strategies that they come up with, they you do not see a difference or a kind of a different lens or a more interventionist lens from the point of view of women or children. Most climate interventions are gender neutral. They are more oriented to technology and market. And because, so if you think about the climate intervention mitigation, so there are mitigation strategies and the adaptation strategies. In terms of mitigation strategies, if you see the kind of mitigation strategies that are there, some of them focus on reducing fossil fuel, use of fossil fuel, using more renewable energy, biofuels. But who does that work? So if you have to plant more biofuel crops, or use a different kind of stove, a solar stove, or a low, the work is now shifting to women. However, at the same point of time, any of these technological innovations do not take into consideration the needs of the women of a particular area. Depending on where you are located, what your context is, your needs may also be very different. What kind of a family you are from, whether you have the money to kind of invest in something like this. What about maintenance of such kind of innovations? Is it possible? All of those aspects are not taken into considerations, but because technologically these are probably more eco-friendly, one is pushing them in terms of mitigation strategies. There are also other kind of eco technologies which are being used, such as compost bins, efficient wood stove, dry toilets. Are they being used in the way they should be used? Because they are increasing family costs. How do you maintain them? Is there enough information for women to understand how they have to be used? Also, the strategies in terms of forest conservation, the distance in terms of collecting fodder, fuel has increased. Men are being stopped from working in the forest in majority of the areas. That again increases the work of women. But all of these strategies are kind of, while they look into the gendered, the gender being an important aspect to consider when you look at climate change, majority of the mitigation adaptation strategies do not take into consideration more gendered and gender transformative approach to understand what needs to be done. In terms of adaptation, one finds that majority of the climate information services, not just in India, but also in, say, in countries like Tanzania and all, are very men oriented. So, the information that is given in terms of crops, in terms of weather, climate, they're all very men oriented, and the women mostly have very little access to these kind of information. Now, even though women are doing majority of the agriculture work, the decision making lies with the men. So they are more of the workers, but not really doing the work, not really taking any decisions. And because they do not have access to a lot of information that would probably have helped them to bargain, better strategies, they are at a loss. But most climate information services again are very focused towards men and men's needs. The climate smart agriculture is something again I read about. It's planting shock resistant plants or composting, vermiculture. All of these are very labor intensive work, and one finds that all of these labor intensive tasks fall on women. While there is already a care work, the direct and the indirect human care work that Sudeshna spoke about, that is already existing, and there is no state support for those. Considering that we still, talking about better public infrastructure in terms of water, fuel, fodder. We are also talking about care services. The Anganwadis are not enough. There is no elderly care. There is no after-school care. There is no, mostly in most places, there's no disability care. There's no pet care. So all of these care work that the woman is already doing, what the climate change policy is, what is it's doing now is, it's kind of extending the care work to, caring for the environment and becoming, in terms of women being taking the lead in terms of, pursuing this, bringing better, making more climate sensitive interventions. In terms of designing also, on most innovations, women are not able to come into picture. So what I'm basically trying to focus on is that there is a need to, kind of, when we are talking about climate change, there is a need to kind of look at care work and care economy as an important aspect. Investing in care, both more, not only just in terms of child care, but also in elderly care, would help women to be, I mean, if you are expecting women to lead just the way there's an expectation that, women need to do work in terms of poverty alleviation. So now there are these SHGs, and there is all the other extended work that women have to do across villages in terms of poverty alleviation work. Women are also expected to now, take the lead in terms of climate change interventions. But if there is no support in terms of care work that the women anyway feel is core to their work, uh, it's very difficult for them to, then have extended responsibilities. There is a need to then therefore look at, when we are talking about climate change interventions, climate change policies, it is required to understand that care work is very core, is very central to all the activities that we do. And giving care support would also lead to, better climate change interventions. Thank you so much.
Again, a very thought-provoking presentation. I think it has again helped open up many new dimensions of this very complex issue. In a sense, help us also recognize the implications of moving towards a more caring society. So we have, I think that there are a couple of questions that Bhavna has addressed, but maybe other speakers can also comment on. But before that, I just wanted to pick up on a few things that Monica shared. One was the idea of, I mean, again, looking at climate change and a technocratic approach to addressing it, how invariably technologies that are, when our strategy for mitigation or adaptation is technology intensive, what we forget is technologies are created often by men again, and there are values embedded in those technologies, and there is not enough of a voice or a representation of the disadvantaged groups. It could be, as she mentioned, in this case it is women, but then it could be so many other disadvantaged groups who are burdened with the unfairly burdened with the burden of care work. So one question I want to ask from both Sudeshna and Monica, and maybe the other panelists could also weigh in, is we see that the market caters to the middle class and upper middle class, and when it does cater to the, it's generally exploitative. I mean, there is a logic there that if it's profit driven, then its focus is going to be that. The state, as Sudeshna's presentation made clear, is apathetic in best scenarios. There are policies, but those policies don't really, they are not regulated. The quality aspect is not looked into. The last mile issue is not addressed. It is often handed over to NGOs to implement. So then the question is, there is also the stakeholder of the community. Now, for these women who are, or other disadvantaged groups, in some cases it could be the Dalits, it could be other sections of society who are oppressed, who are burdened with care work. I know that there have been various innovative strategies that NGOs have developed of community-based support for care work. I don't know if you would like to shed any light on this. How can the community become or fill in, at least partially? And is there a danger in doing that? Because then everything gets pushed on. Because right now it's the nuclear family, and as the nuclear family, as the family shrinks, the precarity increases. There's less support, right? So it's also linked to this question of migration. Now families are broken. One half is in the slum in the city, the other, the elderly and the children, are in villages. So with this increasing precarity, and with the state and the market not really coming to the rescue of those who are really vulnerable, is the community in some way potentially or actually filling up that gap?
So may I take that, Sudeshna? Can I? Yeah. So during the time of COVID, what one saw was the community, care in a big way, whether it was about oxygen cylinders, whether it was about giving information, uh, sitting with people, talking to them, all of those things. Each one of us has done it. We know a lot of people who from the local areas who stood up, and whether it was distribution of food, all of those things. But I think it's very important to while care is effective labor, but it's very important to keep it within the realm of work. Because one of the biggest problem of care work is, and its invisibilization, is that because it is taken as something that you do out of, something that you like doing. So women look after their children because they love children. They have a nurturing tendency. That is the logic. So with this kind of a conversation, this kind of an opinion, what it leads to is then we see the Anganwadi workers who are not even taken as workers, who are sahayikas or who are honorarium workers, because it is expected that they would do this work for the community children out of love and will not ask for minimum wages. So I think it is it's an important thing to understand that care is a skill work. Everybody cannot, the kind of care that is needed. Of course, we all care for our families, we do, but all kind of care requires certain skill. It is work which require, it's tedious work, it's labor intensive. It is unique for each person within the family. Also, every person requires a different unique kind of care work. And even when you're not directly caring, even if you may have people to look after, you can outsource, you are still caring, because you have to plan, you have to supervise, you have to constantly. So if, even if you maybe not be doing things physically, you are doing the things mentally, you are constantly doing. It's a tedious 24/7 work, and therefore it is very easy to take it as something that comes naturally to women, and which is why the whole feminization of this work is happening. It's important to, even when we look at community work, uh, the when women and men come into this work, in care work, they are not paid equal wages to say something else, if they were into some other work. So it's important to look at it as skilled labor, as skilled work, and continue that narrative so that it is recognized by the state as skilled work. Only then, there's also going to be visibility within the household for women's labor. Madras High Court's latest order in terms of homemakers getting equal right in their husband's property is an important way ahead. And I think that such kind of narratives will really help in bringing recognition to it.
Thank you, Monica. Professor Chopra, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sudeshna, and thank you, Monica. I mean, such detail is, sort of richly informed by your own work and research, and it really sort of opens out areas in a very unique way. I just have a very small question, or rather comment question for Monica, which is that, since you talk about climate change and relate it specifically to the decline in agriculture and agrarian activity because of the precarity that agriculture has introduced, or climate change has introduced in the context of agriculture, and you spoke of it, as sometimes I think we often do, that women are left behind to cope with this declining agrarian work and the labor involved in keeping things together. I think just because I guess I've been thinking about men and masculinities for a while, I think one of the things that occurs to me is that I migrate out of this context, leaving the family behind, as though it was a choice. And I think the question we need to ask is whether, is it choice or compulsion? What is the sense in which that migration is for the sake of the family? How does the household and agriculture actually depend on some cash inflows that a household requires, that infusion of cash inflows that migrants then through their sort of cities necessary. It's obviously seemingly volitional, but it's clearly also structural. I think that there is a sense in which there's a expectation, just as there is an expectation that women will care for children because of love for the children, they love them. AMs will not demand minimum wage because that is the kind of gender expectation. Similarly, that the expectation that men must leave. Men are the primary members who can be sent away in order to sustain the family, to reproduce the family. And I think that in a sense, migration itself, mobility itself is a form of labor. And it is a response, the increasing kinds of migration, the increasing uncertainties of migration, the context and segments into which migrants are being employed is a reflection of climate change itself. So the two, the gendered work of women and the work of men in migration are to be seen side by side.
I completely agree with your point, Professor Chopra, and I apologize if my point is coming out as this men going out by choice. No, there is a compulsion there too. The whole breadwinner model is such that men have to do certain kind of work and women have to do certain kind of work. But my point is to focus on structures. The structures that compel them to do this, the structures that are compelling them, and who is it then beneficial for? Why cannot there be better investment in care economy, or structures, public infrastructure, which could make things easier for them? If there was more care investment in care economy, if care was taken care of by the state, women could have also gone out and worked, right? But this model itself, because there is a men will find some other way, and then if there is a land left back, it is the women who have to look after, while they will also do their care work. So the multiplicity of work, why they were there, they cannot pass on their care work to somebody else, maybe their younger child or someone, but the work stays with them, and they are now, this added work is also given. More and more what is happening is that our care, and I think your slides in terms of this whole reverse migration shows that we are responsible for ourselves. The state is nowhere there, but actually in a state, we are a welfare country, so if the state is responsible to look after the people. But what the slides that you're seeing, more and more the people are understanding that we have to look after ourselves. So whether it is in climate change or the consistent everyday strains and problems, people are looking after themselves through different strategies, whether it is migration or whether it is coping with the care work.
If we can
I'm sorry,
Professor Chopra, if you can share your comment, and then we hear from
I'll just take a
and
second. Monica, I mean, the only thing that I would be somewhat wary of is to say that if the state stepped in, women would also be enabled to leave and migrate or do other things. It seems to me that it's not just the stepping in of the state. I mean, there is a sort of prior structure of expectation that exists And sure, it's not an individual choice, but equally the question I could ask is, well, the state is not enabling men to remain behind either, or be caregivers.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree.
Can we hear from
Sudeshna.
Sudeshna? You
Sudeshna.
have a question, and I don't know if it's a question or a comment.
No, it's a comment actually on your question on whether the community can take on. So first to say that, again, I'll come from the childcare perspective. So when women are going out to do paid work or managing their paid work within home or within the neighborhood, who's taking care of the children? Either it's the girl child who's keeping classes, or it's another woman in the neighborhood, or the child is locked inside the home, which happens for many, many domestic workers in the cities. So informally, community is actually stepping in. But if it is a community program, we have seen it hugely depends upon women's voluntary work. Anganwadi workers are to some extent volunteers workers. The scheme workers are volunteer scheme workers. There's a Wawawasi program in Peru, where women distribute milk to undernourished children in the community. It is entirely voluntary. So there's a perception that women are sitting free, and also the caring job is for the women, and hence they will take care of it. I had been part of mobile creches directly and indirectly for last 12, 13 years. And mobile creches started a program called home-based creche workers, where they trained the community women, and they experimented whether childcare can be taken, childcare can be given by women in the slums within their homes. And it was seen that there was problem of space, and also it cannot generate income which is self-sustaining. So it went to, it expanded its program. It provided a space where the community trained women, the trained community women could provide childcare within that space. But there also, because childcare is such a labor-intensive, human-intensive work, so their mobile creches had to subsidize the income of the community workers. So see, childcare is an extremely expensive work because it is and technology cannot actually substitute the human interaction, the tacit thing which is involved. And hence, but why is it so undervalued? Because there's a social dimension, the patriarchal structures which Monica and Radhika ji talked about, that there's a hierarchy among men and women. Men earn, women care, and hence care is a work which needs to be undervalued. And hence, when we look at state family creche workers, they are all undervalued. They do not get. So this is a very complex thing. So when we look at community taking over, or the employer or the state, we need to also reinforce the value of care work and revisit what we had been thinking about it earlier under the patriarchal mindset, and then only, and also underline the responsibilities of other institutions, and then care becomes a collective responsibility. This is something I wanted to underline.
Thank you, Sudeshna. Just before I ask Bhavna, I just wanted to add, we are focusing a lot on patriarchy, which is really the heart of the challenge. But there's also the certain form of capitalism that our society has created, the neoliberal, or however you want to call it. I think Bhavna probably wants to share more on that. But I think it's important to also recognize that structures that exist today, when Monica says, we have to recognize it as work, I think one has to recognize how the nature of work itself has been so narrowly defined that it should have a very particular kind of economic value. and what that has done in terms of the values of society as well. Yes, Bhavna. Sorry if I jumped the gun and please go ahead.
And there's nothing that I can say that has not been said before, perhaps. So I agree with you. So what I'd like to say is, when we are saying value something, what do we mean? What is value? Usually, and today's time, when we say value, we equate it with the ability to have currency. And currency is mostly money. And that is the linear and minimal definition of value. Whereas if I think about my grandmother didn't think of herself any less because she didn't earn a single rupee in her life. She was able to tell my grandfather that she will care for her parents in that day and age as the eldest of daughters, as much as she cared for my grandfather's parents, because she, her value was not the money that she brought into the house. We are living in capitalist times. Consumerism is on its high. The only way we establish our value is by the money that we earn and the money that we can spend. So currency has a significant role to play. The one who can earn X thousand rupees, X $1,000 becomes more valuable than the one who doesn't. And we do need to keep that in mind when we talk about valuing something. So there is this glorification, for example, of the ASHA workers or the Anganwadi workers or the mother in a home, or sometimes doctors and healers in the times of pandemic, when we make them angels and put them on a pedestal, which has its own toxicity. But the point is that valuing that work needs to be in a holistic fashion as much as it needs to be for other people. So for example, it is not just cool to be able to make X amount of money. So if you are not a good citizen, if you are not a values-based person, etc., etc. But I think that understanding seems to have eroded over a period of time. And maybe we need to bring that into a conversation as to what does it mean to lead a full life? What does it mean to be a holistic citizen, a responsible adult in a home and in workplace and in society and so on and so forth. I'll just take a pause because I'm just leaving a thread for a conversation, and it can go multiple places.
Yeah, I think Sudeshna and then Monica.
So very briefly to your point on capitalism, Dr. Arash, I totally agree. When we talk about migration, the workers there do not have a stable job. Those jobs are time-bound. And who reproduces that labor? That labor comes back to the village. And it's the village, it's the unpaid work of when the migrant workers come back, or in the cities, which is actually helping the capital to regenerate labor. And this regeneration is not happening where the capital is produced, but it is actually expanded to the rural areas where they belong to. So care work do contribute to profit making in a number of ways. And secondly, the valuation of care work, it really helps to use the social undervaluation of care work. Then it keeps the wages of domestic workers down. The entire paid wages for housework debate, it comes down to 500 rupees for housewives by the states. So it doesn't come to a dignity. Care workers do not have a dignity. So that valuation, I think, needs to be, it's a social learning, it's a social education. It has to be embedded within our culture and in our socialization. Thank you.
Yes.
So we are almost over, we have reached our end time. So just the last point. See, I think it's important to understand famous economist, you said, I'm forgetting his name, I can't recall, but he said, I pay my governess this amount of money, and if I marry her, the GDP will fall. The point is that the work that we are doing, and I agree, Bhavna, that the value of caring for someone is not just about money, but it is about, the point is that we live in a world where GDP counts. We live in a world where valuation is about money. And until unless one does not when one talks about dignity of labor, when one talks about dignity of work, it's important that I get paid for what I deserve. And my work is given that dignity only when I'm paid something. The fact remains that there is a hierarchy, and those who are paid more, who earn more, are at the top of the line. Those who are homemakers are not at the top. We don't have a homemaker right now in this panel. So the fact is that women who have so-called made these choices to stay at home and look after their family, it's great. And but the point is that as in an upper middle class or an upper class, you are doing it out of choice, and maybe you're also getting the dignity out of it. You have a supportive family, you're seen as somebody. But what is happening in the upper class, it kind of trickles down to classes where the dignity of work also goes down. And therefore it is important that when we're talking about care work, because while it is happening in the private household, it is between the family. But when that work is coming from the private, within the private walls of a household to a public space, when we are looking at domestic workers, when we are looking at Anganwadi workers, when we are looking at any frontline workers, we are again fixing their pay, their dignity of work according to the valuation that is inside the household. That is where the problem lies. If the work within the home was valued, seriously valued in every household, the valuation when it comes outside the household would have been much more. But what we see is that in the economic world that we stay in, when the care work comes outside in the market space, it is not valued. So when there's a fight going on for years now for social protection for domestic workers, for recognition of their work, for better pay, for 2 to 4 leaves in a month. But the activist advocacy people who have been working on it, the domestic workers who have been fighting for it, have not been able to achieve it. There is a reason why you've not been able to achieve this, because there is no valuation or there's no dignity of that work. So I think it is important to see that line, and also to understand that all of us are placed differently in different contexts. And therefore, what may affect somebody cannot be equated to another person, because their realities of life are very different. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this has been very, I think it's really brought to light how care, there is this intersection of the issue of justice, which I think Monica is really talking about, social and economic justice, which demands that existing injustice first be seen. You have to make visible the fact that for millions and millions of underprivileged people, many of them based on gender, on economic status, the impulse to care is the basis of exploitation, and that the way to come out of that within the structure that exists is to recognize that this work has value. It must be valued on par with the other kind of, so it has to be made visible, it has to be recognized. But then I think what also this issue points out to is the need for a reconsidering of the fundamental values. And I think that's what also is coming out in this discussion, to reconsider what kind of the kind of society we have. I mean, exactly what the pandemic did was to highlight how insufficient our structures in society today are, which are based on the economic growth paradigm, on the salience of GDP, on this idea that everyone should be self-interested, they should, focus on their own development, utility maximizing, profit seeking. I mean, it's a caricature, but essentially that's the individualist direction in which we are moving. In a sense, that's contributing to the problem. So one could say, make someone a more empowered player in this game of, competitive one-upmanship, where, and so one part of the solution is that, but then the game itself is a problem, because I think that's what Bhavna and others are sharing, which is that so I think really, if one thinks of the challenge, it is in terms of addressing the challenge, it's depends on the time horizon we are thinking of. In the more medium term, I think the issue is what Professor Banerjee is saying, which is first get the injustice addressed, make visible the insufficiencies of the system, and begin to address that. In the short term and medium term, we can't think of fundamental changes in values, and that probably is going to take a much longer time. But that long term, in the long term, one begins to think of a movement towards a society which is based on a different set of values, a set of values that recognize the salience of care to all forms of. I don't know if there's any final comments from the speakers before we end.
It's so hard to bring a conversation like this to a close. I am certainly thought-provoked and triggered. Very grateful for the space and the fact that we are starting this conversation. I do think that it is extremely important for us in our life to experience compassion and care, for us to be able to offer it forward. It is fuel that we need to receive. It is an experience that we need to have. And sometimes adversity can also support us in building our ability to have compassion. I do think that our response to adversity builds our adversity quotient. And just like our IQ and our EQ has been important, it is also equally important for us to pay attention to our adversity quotient and the response that we have received from people around us, what we have experienced, and what we can offer back to the world that we live in. I am, for one, delighted that we are having this conversation. It is no longer as invisible as it used to be. So with hope and anticipation, hope, looking forward to other things that will emerge from here.
Thank you so much. If there are no other closing comments, then I'd like to thank all the panelists for a very thought-provoking, like Bhavna shared, a rich and thought-provoking discussion. I think many threads have emerged. I don't think we've tied them up yet. I don't, like she said, I think it's too ambitious to expect within a 2-hour webinar to tackle these very complex issues. But I think a process of reflection and dialogue has begun, which hopefully we can sustain. I'd like to thank the participants as well. I think most of the questions have been responded to. I'd like to thank them for their thought-provoking comments and questions. And we will be back with the second webinar in this series, which will focus on the role of the community. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm invisible for the moment. Something went wrong.
Thank
But
you.
thank you. It was
Thank you,
wonderful to
Professor
listen to everyone.